You ever watch someone underestimate a system they don't understand, then get hit with consequences so fast it feels like a circuit breaker snapping? Give me 5 seconds and I'll show you exactly how arrogance got reverse engineered into justice on a Navy base. Hey girl, what's your rank? The line came out like a cheap joke, but it landed like a slap. The hallway at Naval Base Norfolk was already alive with that early morning energy boots on tile, clipped voices, the faint rattle of gear, and then the laughter burst out. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, 28, SEAL for 6 years, walked with that swagger you see in guys who mistake confidence for character. His teammates fanned out behind him, chuckling like a chorus. To them, this was harmless fun. To the woman standing in front of them, it was a test of discipline she'd taken 1,000 times in harder places than this polished corridor. Diana Washington, 34, stood still and let the noise wash past her. She didn't flinch. She didn't bite. She just breathed in that 4-count box rhythm she'd learned on missions where panic got people killed. 4 seconds in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, quietly running her own internal control loop while the hallway ran theirs. Morrison leaned closer, enjoying the power of his own voice. Sorry, didn't catch your answer, or maybe you don't know how to read ranks yet. I know the Army's got special programs for people like you. He said people like you with that lazy venom that tries to stay invisible, like spyware buried inside a friendly app. The guys behind him laughed again louder this time, pulling attention from passing sailors who slowed down just enough to watch without getting involved. What they saw was a black woman in uniform, calm, alone and silent. What they didn't see was the real architecture of the moment. Diane wasn't a random visitor. She had arrived 3 days earlier under official paperwork that labeled her presence routine inspection of special training facilities. She wasn't on base to make friends. She was on base to map a failure mode, isolate the root causes, and recommend fixes. And unlike Morrison, she didn't confuse rank with worth. She understood it as responsibility. Morrison turned to his teammates, speaking loud enough for the hallway to hear. Look, guys, we found someone who doesn't even know where she is. She probably got lost looking for the kitchen or laundry room. He bent the joke into something older, uglier, the kind of low-tier stereotype that survives because nobody with power ever calls it out. Diana lowered her eyes for half a beat. Morrison thought that meant she'd folded. What she was really doing was capturing data faces, name tags, tone changes, who laughed first, who laughed hardest, who looked away. In engineering terms, she was logging the system's state before the cascade. She already knew how this would end. The only missing piece was how far Morrison was willing to go before gravity took over. Maybe we should teach some rules to our new visitor, Morrison said, sliding into that soft menace that tries to sound casual. Rule 1, this is SEAL territory. Rule 2, people like you take orders. They don't give them. Diana lifted her eyes and met his. Calm, flat, not fear, not rage. The kind of steady look that makes a confident man feel a little off balance, like a compass near a magnet. For a fraction of a second, Morrison felt something primitive in his gut, a whisper that he might be touching a live wire. But his ego was louder than his instincts. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he wanted her to feel forced to listen. Rule 3, stay in your lane. If you get smart, I'll make sure your time here is educational. Understood. Diana nodded slightly. Understood, she said. Low voice, controlled, almost bored. Very educational. That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have walked away and let the moment dissolve. But Morrison wasn't normal. He was the kind of guy who sees restraint as weakness and thinks humiliation is leadership. Over the next 3 days, he turned Diana's visit into a public game. He spread his private latte joke through the platoon, and base rumor networks do the rest the way fire does in dry brush. Every meal, every hallway pass, every training block, there he was, announcing her presence like she was entertainment. She saw women, minorities, even a couple of junior guys who looked like they knew better laugh along or stare at their trays because challenging Morrison in public mean becoming the next target. Diana had faced open hostility before. What cut deeper was seeing fear turn decent people into spectators. Morrison had a pattern he always does. He'd approach her table, ask loud, dumb questions about basic protocol like he was testing a civilian who wandered in from the street. Tell us the standard procedure for equipment inspection. Or is that too advanced for visitors? Diana would answer cleanly. Precisely. with more fluency than the men asking could fake. She cited doctrine, variations for terrain and threat scenarios, and best practices that came from hard lessons, not PowerPoint. Morrison would twist her competence into mockery. Wow, someone memorized the manual. Cute. He didn't know she'd helped rewrite manuals after missions where a single bad assumption cost lives. He didn't know she'd carried senators out of kill zones under fire, then watched those same men shake hands in public with no idea who protected them. He didn't know her medals weren't shiny for TV, they were quiet for survival. He only knew the role he'd assigned her in his head outsider lesser. Safe to target. Every night she walked the perimeter of the base the way she had on deployment, not because she was lost, but because movement helps you think. It was the same mental discipline used in reconnaissance. Observe, log, confirm, don't alter the environment until the operation is ready on the fourth day. Morrison crossed into physical intimidation. During PT, he accidentally bumped her hard enough to make her stumble in front of the company. He threw on a fake concerned voice. Careful there, soldier. The Army doesn't have insurance for accidents involving visitors. The group laughed. Diana reset her balance, eyes forward, no reaction. Inside, she filed it under escalation. Then Friday came. Lunch hour. Morrison walked up carrying a tray and the kind of grin that says he's planned this. He stepped near her chair and slipped, dumping orange juice down the front of her uniform. Bright stain, public stage. Jesus, he said loudly, grabbing napkins like a comedian hitting his punchline. How clumsy of me. But hey, now your uniform's more colorful. Suits you better. The cafeteria roared. But this time Diana didn't leave. She stayed seated, calmly blotted the stain, folded the napkins, then looked up at him. Accidents happen, she said evenly, especially when people don't pay attention to where they're stepping. Morrison's smile faltered a fraction. There was something in her tone, not a threat, not a plea, just a quiet authority that made him feel, for an instant, like he was being measured and found wanting. He recovered with a scoff. Sure, some accidents are preventable. Diana stood with slow composure. True, she said. Some accidents are perfectly preventable. All it takes is situational awareness. She walked out with the posture of someone who'd been trained to carry weight without showing strain. Morrison watched her go with a sour twist in his gut. He couldn't articulate why, but the system he thought he controlled wasn't behaving the way his model predicted. That night in her quarters, Diana opened a laptop that wasn't on any base inventory list. Naval Base Norfolk was a red circle. Morrison was a bright hot spike inside it. She opened the Norfolk file photos, discrete audio clips, dated logs, witness statements from soldiers who'd been targeted before, and a behavioral pattern analysis showing how Morrison selected victims, performed humiliation with witnesses present, and avoided formal evidence. She added her own 5 days of data like a final layer in the stack. Then she wrote an update, attached it all, and transmitted it through encrypted channels to an address that officially didn't exist. People at a level Morrison would never meet were now reading his jokes as evidence. She wasn't just documenting a bully, she was documenting a failure in command climate, the kind that corrodes readiness like rust in a load-bearing beam. Monday morning, Morrison came ready to finish her off. During briefing, he seated her front row and fired off more test questions for the whole company to enjoy. Morrison forced a laugh. Beginner's luck, but his voice didn't have bite anymore. Diana turned slightly. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, may I ask a question about command procedure? He bristled but nodded. Sure, let's educate. She asked softly. In your experience, what is the protocol when a senior officer identifies herself after a period of covert observation? The question hung in the air like a pin pulled halfway out of a grenade. Morrison frowned, confused. His team shifted in their seats. He didn't know he'd just stepped onto the final tile of a trap laid with patience. That afternoon, General Patricia Hayes Blackwoman, 52, one of the highest-ranking officers on base, came to Diana's quarters. Hayes had been watching, too. She looked at Diana with that seasoned eye that recognizes combat posture in a heartbeat. You're not who they think you are, Hayes said. Diana didn't deny it. She showed credentials after biometric checks that made Hayes' eyebrows rise. Colonel Diana Washington, Special Operations, Hayes read. Breath-catching. You've been officially dead for 2 years. Diana nodded. Officially, Hayes exhaled slow, like someone watching a fuse burn to the end. She reviewed the evidence Diana had collected, the audio. The messages, the witness stack. He has no idea what he's done, Hayes muttered. Not yet, Diana's voice stayed calm. He will. Thursday lunch, Morrison pulled what he thought was his grand finale. He brought a civilian guest, the mayor, into the cafeteria and paraded Diana like a spectacle. Mayor Johnson, meet our special visitor. Maybe you can explain the real world to her since she seems lost. The mayor looked uncomfortable, shook Diana's hand politely. What's your role here, he asked. Morrison laughed. Good question. She says she's inspecting something. Doesn't look like the profile, does she? Diana answered smoothly. I'm conducting a behavioral assessment for a Senate committee investigating institutional discrimination in military facilities. Morrison snorted. Sure you are. And I'm the Secretary of Defense. Diana tilted her head. Funny you mention him. My report goes to his desk Friday. For the first time in a week, Morrison didn't laugh right away. His electronics finally picked up a signal his ego couldn't cancel. Diana reached into her bag, pulled out a secure military phone, and called. General Hayes, could you join us in the cafeteria? It's time for formal introductions. 5 minutes later, General Hayes walked in full dress uniform, stars catching the light. She marched straight to Diana's table, stopped at attention, and saluted her a full formal salute. Not performative, not hesitant. The kind that lands with authority because it's protocol and respect fused into one motion. Colonel Washington, Hayes said clearly, voice carrying across the frozen room. I apologize for the treatment you received. Corrective measures will be implemented immediately. Morrison's face went blank. His mouth opened, then shut. His seals behind him looked like the oxygen had left their lungs. Diana stood, returned the salute with surgical precision, then turned to him. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, voice steady, you've had a lot to say about rank this week. Now you'll explain yourself. To me, to this base, and to a Senate committee. Silence. Then the handcuffs. And the sound of a career collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. Morrison tried to stammer out, I didn't know who you were. Diana's eyes stayed level. That's the point. You only respect people when you think they can hurt you back. That's not leadership. That's cowardice dressed in uniform. The MPs escorted him out. Nobody laughed now. And here's what matters for the rest of us watching from the outside. This wasn't about one man making one stupid joke. This was about a system that allowed him to run that joke into a full-scale campaign because too many people had learned to keep their heads down. Diana didn't win because she yelled louder. She won because she understood leverage, evidence, and timing. She let him reveal the full profile of his behavior until the case was unmissable, then flipped the switch. That's engineering in human form: observe, measure, confirm, then correct. 6 months later, Morrison was dishonorably discharged after court-martial. His team faced investigations. Norfolk implemented new reporting channels and training with real teeth. Congress opened hearings based on Diana's nationwide findings. And Diana Washington, once mocked in a hallway, now led reforms that protected soldiers who'd been forced into silence for years. So when you hear this story, don't just hear revenge. Hear design. Hear a woman who refused to let a toxic system stay undocumented. Hear the truth that doesn't care who's loudest, only who's right. If you've ever seen a workplace where the wrong people run the room because everyone else is scared, you already know why this matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories where humility meets justice and arrogance meets reality, stick around and subscribe.